Did it just bang his head? Yeah. Just muted everyone who's coming into this evening's meeting. Good evening, I'm Sharonda Robinson. Welcome to the Austin-Bergstrom International Airport public meeting. We're going to be talking about the environmental assessment, and we're going to get going in just a moment. With song. Welcome, Carmen. Glad you're here. You are all I long for. Hello, is it Rita Gonzalez? Good evening. Chris Rodriguez, welcome. Glad you're here. Frank Sinatra, Fly Me to the Moon. Stop it so we don't get kicked off Facebook. All the things. All right. We are live. So we're going to get started in just a few moments, give folks some more time to enter this evening's update and overview of the Austin-Bergstrom International Airport Environmental Assessment. If you want to say hello in the chat, please, you're welcome to. We have the Zoom chat going, and then also we've got folks monitoring online on Facebook. And so we want to greet those of you who are joining on Facebook as well. I have a good friend of mine who I have the honor of working with, Larissa Davila. Can we pull her up on the screen to join me? She's going to do a little bit of interpretation as we give some instruction before we get going this evening. Hola, Larissa, ¿cómo estás?
Muy bien, muchas gracias.
Thank you for joining. So we're going to be able to offer tonight's meeting in Espanol. Sí, so can you please let the folks know about that?
Absolutely. Bienvenidos a las personas que nos acompañan en el idioma español. En unos momentos vamos a aprender nuestro cuarto de interpretación en español virtual y van a poder accesar desde su teléfono o su computadora. Lo único que tienen que hacer es, si nos acompañan desde su computadora, pueden hacerlo en la parte inferior de la pantalla, en el icono del mundo. Si nos acompañan desde una tableta o un teléfono celular, no pueden presionar a los tres puntitos para más opciones, buscar Language Interpretation, interpretación de idiomas, y seleccionar el idioma español. En unos momentos lo vamos a encender y esperamos que nos acompañen en el idioma español.
Mil gracias, Larissa. So we are going to start in just a moment, and I'm going to ask my team to pull up the opening slide. We're right at the top of the hour at 6 p.m. And Larissa, I'll see you back in just a moment.
Thank you.
And welcome to everyone who's joining on Facebook. We welcome you. And if you want Spanish interpretation, I'll ask that someone from our team include the link to the Zoom meeting so that you can experience Spanish interpretation for this meeting. All right. So I'm just going to welcome you. I'm Sharonda Robinson, and you have joined the environmental assessment for the Austin-Bergstrom International Airport Expansion and Development Program meeting. And we welcome you to tonight's conversation and update on what's happening with the environmental assessment. We're going to get our meeting going. We've got a lot of good information to share with you. And as this is the official start, I want to share a few slides on utilizing the interpretation rooms, and then we'll send Larissa Davila into the Spanish interpretation room. So Larissa, can I get you here to welcome folks, and then let's go to our next two slides as we give folks instruction. So you can select which language you want to participate in tonight's meeting in. So Larissa, can you tell us a little bit more about that? And welcome.
Of course. Para las personas que nos acompañan en idioma español, Tenemos en la pantalla las maneras de acceder a la interpretación. Si nos acompañan en la número 1, si nos acompañan desde una computadora o una laptop, pueden ir al icono del mundo que está en la parte inferior de su pantalla y seleccionarlo. Después pueden seleccionar el idioma español y con eso podrán acompañarnos.
Thank you for that. And so in just one moment, we'll turn on the interpretation room. I also want to let folks know how to access the interpretation if you're on your laptop, not your laptop, your tablet or your cell phone. And so we have another slide that provides a little bit of information on that. Larissa?
Yes, of course. Para las personas que nos acompañan desde una tableta o un teléfono celular, en unos momentos vamos a encender el espacio de interpretación en español virtual y les pedimos que vayan a la opción que son los 3 puntitos para seleccionar más opciones. Después se pueden ir a interpretación de idiomas, language interpretation, y pueden seleccionar el idioma de su preferencia, inglés o español.
Thank you so much, Larissa. So if we could turn on the interpretation room and folks can select which language. If you're going to stay in English, you don't need to do anything. But if you're going to experience the meeting in Spanish, then go ahead and select the Spanish interpretation room. We'll give it just a moment to turn that on. And Larissa, we will see you at the end of the meeting. Have a good meeting.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So give it just a moment for that little globe to show up at the bottom of your screen. I believe one of my team members is turning that on now for us. And then we will get going with the rest of our meeting. And I am not seeing it show up, so let's see how I can help here. All right. So let's go back to the previous slide. I want to give a little bit of information on housekeeping. So this meeting is an overview of the full environmental assessment. However, the comments that we received tonight will not be a part of the official record. And so what we'll ask you to do, and we'll give you a little bit of information later on in the meeting, is to send us an email, send us a letter, that sort of thing, if you want your comments reflected in the official document. But we are here to provide an overview and to answer any questions that we can about the environmental assessment. This is the second meeting that we're having on this particular environmental assessment. So you'll be able to provide comments. We have closed captioning that is available here for you, and you can turn that on by clicking the CC at the bottom of your screen. And then to ask questions for this evening's meeting, we're going to ask you to raise your hand or put your question in the chat, and we will be monitoring the chat throughout the meeting. We do have time at the end of the meeting for Q&A. Or you can put it in the chat either on Facebook. If you're joining us on Facebook, we're monitoring there, or here in Zoom. So a little bit of housekeeping for you. Next slide, please. So again, I'm Sharonda Robinson. I'm your moderator for tonight's meeting, and just want to quickly go over the agenda. We'll do some introductions. You'll learn a little bit more about the project team and partner agencies. And then there'll be a presentation that has a lot of really good information. The environmental assessment document is several hundreds of pages. And what we've attempted to do tonight is condense that down for you. And that will be the presentation on the overview of the Airport Expansion and Development Program. We'll also go over the timeline and milestones. The NEPA overview will talk about the alternatives, the environmental resource categories, and the summary of environmental findings. And as I mentioned, at the end of the meeting, we'll share with you how to submit your comments for the official environmental assessment document. and then we'll be here to answer your questions. So that's our agenda for this evening's meeting. You'll also notice at the bottom of your screen that you can review the draft EA. It is online and available now. You can go to speakupaustin.org at /AUS-EA, and you can find it online. There are also a couple of locations that I'll remind you of. They're physical copies of the environmental assessment. One location is the Planning and Development Building on the airport campus, which is located at 2716 Spirit of Texas Drive. That's the first location. Another location is at the Ruiz Library, which is at 1600 Grove Boulevard, and at City Hall downtown. I believe that address is 217 West 2nd Street. I'm doing that from memory, so I'll have to look that up. But the City Hall building, downtown Austin, is the third location where you can actually find a physical copy if you're not able to access it online. All right, next slide, please. All right, so as I mentioned, this is the flow of the meeting. We're gonna do an overview. You're gonna be able to provide questions and comments. And if you have non-environmental assessment related questions, we will be spending most of our time tonight talking about the environmental assessment related questions. You can have those questions answered in another form, and we've provided two options for you. One is by email. You can email us at airportinfo@austintexas.gov, or you can call us at 311 to have your question recorded and someone will get back to you. Tonight's focus is really on the environmental assessment. Next slide, please. All right, so let's buckle in, folks, because we've got a lot of information to share with you this evening. And Brian Zinn and David Full are the two folks who have stepped forward on our team who are going to be leading the presentation tonight. There's just so much information, and we're so glad you're here to hear that information. Brian Zinn is an environmental scientist working for the City of Austin in the Department of Aviation. He's one of the leaders of the project team who's been working to prepare the environmental assessment. And he is joined by David Full, who is the Vice President of Aviation Environmental Planning Services at Reynolds Smith and Hills, RS&H. And so, Brian, I think you're up next, and then we'll hear from David. Welcome.
Thank you, Sharonda, and good evening to everybody. And I want to thank you for taking the time to join this public meeting to cover the draft environmental assessment for this Austin Airport Expansion and Development Program. As mentioned, my name is Brian Zinn, and I'm with the Environmental Affairs Division here at the Department of Aviation. Together, we worked with several agencies at federal, state, and local levels to develop this environmental assessment. Our federal partners included the Federal Aviation Administration, or FAA, as well as the United States Fish and Wildlife Service. At the state level, we worked with the Texas Department of Transportation, TxDOT, the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, TCEQ, and the Texas Historical Commission, as well as Texas Parks and Wildlife. And we're working alongside our fellow city departments, being Watershed Protection Department, the Public Works Department, and the Capital Contracting Office. Next slide. Our assembled team for this environmental assessment draws on almost 500 combined years of experience in the industry, utilizing experience and knowledge of the rules and regulations that we have to adhere to determine whether there are any significant impacts from implementing the proposed action. The consultant team members have joined us tonight to be able to answer questions during the Q&A portion of this presentation. Next slide, please. Following COVID-19 and its impacts, AUS had to re-strategize the airport expansion program to meet our recovery profile. This re-strategized program is called the Airport Expansion and Development Program, otherwise known as AEDP. The AEDP will serve to accommodate forecasted growth at AUS using a strategic approach, including optimizing the Barbara Jordan Terminal, building a new midfield concourse and a connector tunnel back to the Barbara Jordan Terminal, and enabling our future expansion with utility and airfield infrastructure. While the 2040 master plan, which was finalized in 2019, serves as a vision for the future of AUS, the AEDP will guide development and construction at the airport over the next 5 to 7 years. Next slide, please. The purpose of the AEDP is to improve the passenger experience. It's to provide reliable air service to Central Texans. It's to provide a safe, convenient, and environmentally sound travel experience, and do this all while reflecting back Austin's values and our Austin community. We've almost completed this environmental process, which my colleague Dave Full will go into more detail on in just a bit, to determine whether or not implementing the AEDP would significantly impact the environment. Next slide. So the AEDP has many components to it. This slide, you can see that it includes new electrical duct banks, a new utility zone, which includes a new south utility plant, a 3-gate expansion on the west side of the Barbara Jordan Terminal, along with relocating the midfield cross taxiways. Next slide. In addition, we have a new electrical substation that we're working with Austin Energy in partnership on. We have a new employee parking area located on the north side of Highway 71. We have new utility and catering access improvements, the new midfield concourse, as I previously mentioned, along with its associated apron area, and that connector tunnel back to the Barbara Jordan Terminal. And it also includes construction laydown zones for construction of all these different components. Next slide. In addition to all that, we're also including reworking of the arrival and departure curbsides at the Barbara Jordan Terminal, along with further improvements to the BJT. And lastly, we are also proposing west airfield improvements and a new parallel taxiway to that west runway. Before we can begin construction on these projects, we have to conduct the environmental assessment. And for more on that, I'm going to hand over the virtual microphone to Dave Full, who will go more in depth about the EA and the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA, process.
Dave, you're on mute.
There we go. Thank you. I've had the good fortune of working with Brian and other people at Austin-Bergstrom on this particular project. I am going to go over quite a bit of information here. And so what I would suggest, if something doesn't make sense to you, please put it in the chat. Happy to talk more about it at the end of the presentation. So with that, I'll talk a little bit about NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act. It has been the guiding legislation for federal agencies for more than 50 years. It was first enacted in 1970. However, it has been updated, regularly updated, to address emerging trends and new information that has occurred since it was first implemented. In fact, the last updates to the NEPA process actually occurred in 2020. So while this law is 50 years old, it continues to be modified and updated. The EA that has been prepared for the AEDP was prepared in compliance with NEPA, in compliance with the Council on Environmental Quality Regulations, the FAA orders, various federal executive orders, and a whole host of other applicable federal, state, and local requirements. NEPA is sometimes referred to as the Magna Carta of federal environmental laws, and it requires a federal agency to consider the environmental consequences of an action, to disclose those consequences to the public, and to use the information in the EA to make informed decisions about the proposed action. And the words proposed action really refer to the AEDP. Proposed action is just a term of art within NEPA. So when I say that, I'm referring to the AEDP. Next slide, please. this slide shows the timeline associated with the AEDP. As you can see, the project was launched in July 2021, and as part of the NEPA process, we conducted public scoping in September of 2021. And that process provided the public and agencies the opportunity to identify issues that they wanted to be sure were included in the EA. After that public scoping, we did other coordination meetings with various agencies as well, and Brian talked about those agencies. Technical studies were conducted and then incorporated into the draft EA, which was published in February of 2022. We are currently in, you can see the "We Are Here" button or arrow. We are currently in the 45-day public review process. And that also includes this virtual meeting that we're having, as well as an in-person meeting that will occur on Saturday. And more information will be provided about that in-person meeting a little bit later on. As part of the NEPA process, we will respond to all comments received during that 45-day comment period. And those responses are included in the final EA, which we are intending to publish by the end of April 2022. Next slide, please. NEPA does require us to review alternatives to the proposed action. And every EA must include a no action alternative. In other words, what happens if we do absolutely nothing at the airport? The no action alternative would keep the airport in its existing configuration, no construction. So to accommodate the increase in forecasted passengers at the airport would have to use existing remote gates and buses to operate the aircraft and those operations. That they can accommodate that activity through 2027. However, by 2032, the existing airport would not be able to fully accommodate the forecast number of passengers at the airport. Next slide, please. So in addition to that no action alternative, we looked at 4 other alternatives that were possible. These include, number 1, maximizing the capacity of the existing Barbara Jordan terminal. Number 2, expanding the existing Barbara Jordan terminal. Number 3 is to expand the existing arrival departure hall with a new pier concourse on the Barbara Jordan terminal and a new midfield concourse. And the 4th is to expand the existing arrival and departure hall with a midfield concourse. The EA contains an analysis of each of the alternatives and whether they meet the purpose and need for the proposed project. And that analysis shows that the 4th alternative is the one that best meets the purpose and needs for the AEDP. Next slide. So as part of doing an environmental assessment, we have to look at study areas in the vicinity of the project. We have 2 separate study areas that we've included in the EA. The first is a detailed study area, and that's shown in the blue line on the map. And the second is a general study area, and that's a much larger area. It includes areas all around the airport, and that's shown on the gold line on the map. The reason we do that is each of the different environmental resource categories that you see on the right side of the slide have different potential for impacts. And so we need to take a look at those in terms of the proper study areas. So what I'm going to do on these next few slides is I'm going to give you a brief overview of each of these environmental resources. And I think, as I said in the beginning, this is not intended to provide you with every bit of information that you'll get out of the EA. It is a high-level overview of the issues, but I want to give you a flavor of what those issues are. So if you do have specific questions, please remember to use that chat here in the Zoom or on Facebook and ask your questions, and we'll get to those at the end of the presentation. So my first next slide, please. So my first environmental resource category is noise. And the FAA has a very prescriptive process for us to actually use to analyze noise impacts. The FAA requires us to use a noise model for determining the magnitude of the change in the noise environment that would occur as a result of the implementation of the AEDP. The FAA identifies a significant noise impact as an increase of 1.5 dB or decibels at a noise sensitive location. And a noise sensitive location for the FAA is residential land uses, a hospital, a school, someplace where people are can be annoyed or bothered by noise. And that 1.5 dB increase has to occur within the 65 dB noise contour. The EA will show that the proposed action, the AEDP, does not result in a 1.5 decibel increase, and therefore no mitigation is required. However, Austin will continue to evaluate noise impacts as a result of aircraft operations on surrounding communities, and Austin will continue to respond to noise complaints as they do today. Next slide, please. For air quality, I think one of the most important things to note, and you'll see it in the upper right-hand corner of this slide, is that Travis County is considered to be an attainment area of the National Ambient Air Quality Standards, which is determined by the US Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA. Now, similar to noise, air quality, we look at that using a model to determine the pollutant emissions that would occur as a result of a proposed action. The emissions estimates that are shown in the model, and you can see them in the EA, are below the EPA thresholds for every air pollutant except for nitrogen dioxide. But because Travis County is in attainment, no mitigation is required. However, just like for noise, for air quality purposes, Austin continues to be committed to reducing air pollutant emissions. One example of that is one of the programs being implemented at the airport is the use of electronic ground support equipment and charging stations. Next slide, please. So for historic and cultural resources, there are no historic or cultural resources known to exist at the airport. We did some surveys and we looked at all the buildings on the airport, and none of them meet the criteria for being considered historic or cultural resources. So all of the buildings that are planned to be demolished as part of the AEDP are not considered to be historic structures. So as a result, no significant impacts to any historical cultural resources would occur, and no mitigation would be required. Next slide, please. Environmental justice communities are categorized through the executive orders signed by President Clinton in the 1990s. They are categorized as minority or low-income populations. And to have an impact on an environmental justice community, a significant impact must occur, and it must disproportionately affect the environmental justice populations compared to the non-environmental justice populations. So the proposed action itself would not result in the relocation of any other land uses. Everything is happening on airport, so no relocation of other land uses would occur. And the proposed project actually would have a positive impact with respect to employment because of the job creation during construction and additional jobs that would be created at the airport to actually maintain and operate the facilities associated with the AEDP. Finally, I would say that Austin does strive to be a good neighbor and supports a local community through job creation, partnering with local nonprofits and school districts, and also a commitment to environmental stewardship. So I'm gonna pause here just to remind folks that if you have questions, put them in the chat and we'll get to those questions at the end of the presentation. And with that, I'll continue to go through the various environmental resource categories and ask for the next slide, please. All right, for water resources, there are no wetlands or floodplains that would be affected by the AEDP, and there are no significant impacts to any of the water courses in the vicinity of the airport. However, the FAA will require that Austin implement standard control measures with respect to erosion and sedimentation controls as part of the construction process. The other environmental resource category on here is land use. Because everything is happening on the airport, there are no changes in land use that would occur as a result of the AEDP. Therefore, there are no significant impacts and no mitigation is required. Next slide, please. For biological resources at the airport, it's important to note that biological resources are fairly minimal at the airport. The airport property is mowed and maintained, and there's no habitat for threatened or endangered species at the airport. However, we do recognize that the project will result in the reduction of habitat for non-threatened and non-endangered species that do exist at the airport. But because they are not threatened or endangered, the FAA does not require mitigation for those impacts to biological resources. With respect to climate, we look at that in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. The federal government has not adopted any greenhouse gas standards, but the EA does look at the increase in greenhouse gas emissions that would occur. And note in the EA, we note that there would be a temporary increase in greenhouse gas emissions during construction, and that there also would be a small increase in greenhouse gas emissions due to overall aircraft operations. However, these increases are not considered to be significant and no mitigation is required. And I'm going to pause one more time and put my plug in for asking questions in the chat as I go through this, and if anything doesn't make sense, please ask those questions. And then I'll get to my last couple slides here on environmental resources. So if I could have the next slide, please. And there we go. This slide has two environmental resource categories on it. The first one is the Department of Transportation Section 4F, which means absolutely nothing to anybody unless you do this sort of work. Let me tell you, what is Section 4F? Well, those are properties that are either historic resources, parks, recreation centers, or a wildlife refuge. And we know that in the vicinity of the airport, within our general study area, that there are properties that are eligible for listing on the National Register of Historic Places, and that there are several parks and recreation facilities. So we took a look at each one of those to determine whether they would be affected by the AEDP. And each of those properties would experience a little increase in noise, but none of them reached the 1.5 decibel increase. Therefore, it's not a significant impact and no mitigation is required. For hazards and hazardous materials, the biggest issue there are the buildings that would be demolished. They have had asbestos and lead-based paint in those buildings, but those buildings have been abated for asbestos and lead-based paint. So the demolition of those structures would not result in any release of those hazardous materials into the environment. As a result, that's not a significant impact and no mitigation is required. All right, my next slide, and I think this is my last one. Two more environmental resource categories to discuss. The first one is natural resources, and that really is about energy use at the airport. The AEDP would increase the demand for electricity by approximately 8 megawatts. That's one of the reasons why you see the new substation, the new utility plant on airport, to be able to provide that increased demand for electricity at the airport. So as a result, there is no impact to natural resources and no mitigation is required. For surface transportation, what we looked at was how did the roadways in the vicinity of the airport operate and how would they operate with the implementation of the AEDP. And there would be a slight delay in traffic along State Highway 71 in the vicinity of the airport and also on airport roadways. And that would include Spirit of Texas Drive and Presidential Boulevard. But those increases are very slight and they don't constitute a significant impact. So the FAA will not require any mitigation measures with respect to surface transportation. I think it's also important to note that that traffic improvements are anticipated as a result of the introduction of the Blue Line light rail to the airport, which is intended to basically coincide with the implementation of the AEDP or shortly after it's completed. And with that, again, I just offer up the chat to ask your questions, and I'm going to turn the presentation back.
Well, thank you, Brian, and thank you, David, for walking us through a high-level overview of the environmental assessment. And welcome to those of you who joined us in the meeting. And I see quite a few folks who joined us on Facebook. So welcome to you as well. I'm Sharonda Robinson, and I get to help moderate tonight's Q&A portion of the meeting. We see that there are questions already in the chat, and I've compiled as many of them as I can, and we'll try to move through them as efficiently as possible. I also want to let you know that there is a deadline to submit comments for your formal comments or official comments that would be included in the environmental assessment. That deadline is before 5 p.m. on April 7th of actually in a couple weeks, so next month, 2022. And the way that you can submit comments, there are 4 ways that you can do that. You can use the comment box online at speakupaustin.org/AUS-EA. You can join us at an open house. I want to make sure that everyone knows that a lot of members of the project team will be together to answer your questions on Saturday from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. And we will provide the address for that. It's on the airport campus. The 2716 Spirit of Texas Drive. You can also email if you want to use good old-fashioned snail mail. You can send us a comment by mail at the address that you see there. And you can email us at airportengagement@austintexas.gov. So we are going to be taking those formal comments through April 7th. And what we are doing tonight is not part of the official record, but we did want to create a forum and an opportunity for you to get your questions answered about the environmental assessment. All right. So what I will do now is I'm going to be looking away a little bit because I have, you can go ahead and take the screen down for now, guys, and we'll go over that in just a moment. I have compiled the questions as they're coming in, and I might look away from time to time because I've got my laptop open with Facebook on and want to make sure I catch all of you guys that are on Facebook as well. So if you would like to ask your question verbally, go ahead and raise your hand. And the way that you do that is you go to reactions at the bottom of your screen, click on that little happy face that you see down there. And when you click on it, a little button will pop up that says raise your hand if you want to ask the question yourself. If not, I will do my best to read it for you and hopefully pronounce your name properly. All right, so I'm going to try to take some of the what I consider might be the easy ones first, guys. And if I could get my team that is going to be answering questions to turn their cameras on. That's Grayson Cox with KSA, Santiago Araque with Kimberly Horn, Eliza Ornelas with Bear, Nadia Prosiak with Bear as well, and Christian, I had it earlier, Workacheski, I think I got it, Christian Workacheski, Timothy Middleton, Jean Rendell, and Phil DeVita with HMMH. If you all could turn your screens on so we could be ready for folks to see you when you respond, that would be very helpful. All right. So I think this is an easy one. And this comes from Rocio Villalobos. What are the two National Register of Historic Places sites that were mentioned? Do we have information on those sites? All right, go ahead, David.
That, Sharonda. So the two National Register eligible properties in the general study area is the Martin Family Cemetery and the Colorado School. Those are the two. And we identify those in the EA on page 3-29. So you can take a look at that and get more information there.
Thank you for that answer. And just want to remind folks that the entire EA document is online. We'll put the link in the chat and also on Facebook on speakupaustin.org. All right, that was a pretty easy one. So let's talk a little bit about, I have questions from Sergio Castaños, David King, Stephanie Litinsky, Catherine Bellman Goggins, Solana Renteria, and Paul DeFore. I believe I pronounced that okay. And if you would like to ask your question yourself, go ahead and raise your hand and we'll get to you. So this is a question about noise, and this comes from Solana Renteria. What are the current decibel limits for AO3 and how and where are levels tested? So that sounds like a technical question about decibel levels and noise. And so let's see. Who from our team is going to help us with that? Is that Timothy, Jean, or Jean Rendell?
Well, for the EA, we didn't test noise levels for the airport overlay zone. So there's 3 airport overlay zones at the airport that were developed over the years, and those have different standards that were set by Austin.
Okay.
And so I believe perhaps Brian or Kane might be able to answer what for the AO3 is.
Yeah.
But the airport overlay zones are not officially part of the environmental assessment. They are efforts underway at Austin.
And what is AO3 for those of us who are not aviation savvy?
Yeah, Sharonda. So AO3 is just it's Airport Overlay Zone 3.
Okay.
And so for what decibel level that is land use areas that have a average sound level of less than 65 decibels and also are located within approximately 1/2 mile of that 65 decibel contour area.
Thank you so much. All right, so our next question comes from David King, and he's asking about non-threatened and non-endangered species. So his question is, will the city require mitigation for impacts on non-threatened and non-endangered species? Who can help us with an answer to David's question?
I can take that, Sharonda.
Okay, thank you.
So that's a great question. There's not requirements by the city to mitigate for impacts to non-threatened and endangered species, but through this coordination with Texas Parks and Wildlife and through field studies on the ground, identifying what habitat is there, Parks and Wildlife developed a list of recommendations and best management practices that are being incorporated in the design and construction for the AEDP. So that includes things like using native species in the vegetation restoration after all the construction is done, keeping pollinator species in mind, and that sort of thing.
Thank you. And I also just want to share with the community that is here with us, if we're answering your question and we don't quite get it for you and it's not clear for you, then just ask again or raise your hand and let us know, and we're happy to try and make sure that you get your question answered. And also, while I'm taking a little bit of pause before I get to a question about hours for landing and overnight flights, I want to acknowledge that I think I saw a council member that is here with us. Council member Vanessa Fuentes has joined this evening's meeting. So welcome, Council member Fuentes. It is good to see you. Thank you for joining us this evening. Oh, there she is on the screen. Hello, welcome.
Yes, thank you so much, Rhonda. I'm happy to be here and to learn more about the EA process, and glad to see members of our community on here as well, and listening closely to feedback that's coming in from D2. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And I also, just taking a moment just to pause, I see that the CEO of the airport is here as well, Jackie Yaft. Jackie, can you turn your screen on and see if we can, oh, there she is.
Hi, thank you all for your participation tonight and for everybody's questions. Thank you very much.
Welcome. Thanks for joining. I appreciate it. All right.
And
Back to-
Shonda, sorry to interrupt. I just want to also acknowledge our airport commissioner, Raymond Young, who is our District 2 appointee, is also on the line with us.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Raymond Young. Thank you for joining. Oh, there he is. This is like magical. Everyone's just popping up on my screen as we're saying their names. So thank you. Thanks for joining. And thank you to our community that's here tonight. We appreciate everyone who does the heavy policy lifting, the heavy work, and the day-to-day to make sure that our operations run smoothly and that we plan for our airport growth. So welcome, everyone. All right. So the next question is from Stephanie Natinsky. I don't know if I got that right. Her question is, what are the rules for quiet time? Are takeoffs and landings allowed at all hours? And are the overnight flights required to take off at a higher altitude quicker so they do not disturb the sleeping hours of residents around the airport? That's a great operations question. Is that something we can cover tonight?
Sure, Rhonda, I can briefly touch on it. So the airport does not close, and as a result, we do not have what's known as quiet time hours. As far as changes in flight patterns or takeoff and departure altitudes and items like that, that's outside of the scope of what the EA looked at. That would be something that would have to be looked at by our operations folks and probably with the FAA tower folks as well.
Thank you for that. And Brian, you might want to look at the chat because Stephanie posted another question related to fines and repercussions if there are quiet rules. So I think you addressed that a little bit for us. All right. So we'll keep going. Solana, thank you, Solana. I really appreciate it. She says, I don't feel like my question was answered. How do we as a neighborhood make sure that we are in fact in AO3, not AO2? This matters greatly because it dictates what we can do with our property and has effect on, has effect on future noise mitigation negotiations with the city. For example, our neighborhood was offered noise mitigation measures in the early years of the airport and apparently never came to fruition. So it sounds like there's a concern about the neighborhood being a part of AO3 or AO2. So if we can try to address that for Solana. Who can help me with that question?
I can start and then I'll probably bring in Kane to expand on it a little bit more. But as far as where you can go to see whether you're in the AO3 or the AO2, the city of Austin does have maps and overlays available that you can use to be able to figure out if you're in one of these overlay zones. And as far as the rest of that question, I'm going to have to defer to Kane because he's been around much longer than I have to know about those early efforts.
Yeah, I think we're gonna, hi, this is Kane Carpenter, and I work with Brian. And so I think we're gonna be coming to your neighborhood on Monday. We're gonna be presenting at your neighborhood association meeting. So I'll bring the exhibits with me that show you exactly where the AO2 is, where the AO3 is, and we can discuss that there. So I'll be sure to bring that on Monday. I think this is for Richland Estates. And the early discussions, we weren't part of that. That was, I guess, in the 90s. I know there was some confusion with that. And when we did our Part 150 update years ago, we had to disclose that you guys weren't part of the buyout. So I can't really comment on what was done in the 90s as far as the agreement between your neighborhood and the city or the airport during that time. But we'll be able to clearly demonstrate, where you are today and where the 65 contour is today and where the 65 contour is going to be in 2032 with the proposed project. So I hope that answered your question. If you want to send us some more formal questions today or prior to the meeting on Monday, be happy to bring more information to you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Kane. And thank you, Solana, for following up with us. And it looks like we'll be in your neighborhood in a couple of days. So there are some questions about the environmental assessment and related to whether it is a standalone discrete project. There's also a question about GHG statement qualification. Not sure what that means, but just trying to get you guys ready. So I'm going to go to, and then a question about the adaptation of the facility for sustainable aviation fuel in the future. So, all right, I'm going to take the question from Paul D Fiore first. His question is, do you consider the impacts of this project not only as a standalone discrete project, but also alongside the cumulative impacts of past projects and neighboring projects? We all know these impacts build on each other. It is not credible to say there is absolutely zero impact on climate, water, land, or EJ communities, and no mitigation required. Thank you for that question, Paul. Oh, Paul, and I see you have, I just saw your hand up. I apologize.
Thank you for reading my comment in full and my question. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Well, we'll pull you up on screen here so everyone can see you as well and get some folks to answer your question.
Okay.
So this sounds like a question about cumulative impacts. And I think, Dave, is this?
Yeah, I was going to say, Brian, do you want me to start with that? And yeah, okay. So Paul, that's a great question. So when we look at cumulative impacts, we have to look at it for each of the different environmental resource categories. So with respect to, say, noise, that has included everything that's happened in the past is incorporated into that noise model, as well as what we anticipate would occur in the future for that noise model. So it's not just about the AEDP. We also took a look at, well, if we don't do anything, what sort of operations are going to occur at the airport. And it's not just about passenger operations. It's also, cargo operations and general aviation operations and military operations. All of those are incorporated into the noise analysis, into the noise model. Okay. When we look at air quality, it's the same sort of thing. We're taking a look at all the different pollutant, all the different tailpipes, if you will, that occur at an airport. It's not just aircraft. It's also ground service equipment. It's individual people driving to and from the airport. And all of that is incorporated into that model as well. And the other one I would really talk about is surface transportation, because we took a look at all the other development that's occurring around the airport to determine what the levels of traffic were going to be, not just from the ADP, but from all these developments that would be occurring around the airport. So we don't look at it in a vacuum. We do take a look at all the other things that are occurring as part of it. And those results are included, blended into the EA itself. I hope that's answered your question on that, Paul.
I appreciate you sharing that. Thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Paul, for that question. I also want to remind everyone that is here that we are going to be in person. We're super excited about seeing you on Saturday. If you have the time to join us, we'll be there from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. And there will be a brief presentation I believe it's at 10:30 a.m. And then another of the same presentation that will happen at noon. And the team that you see here and a few more folks are going to be available to answer your questions and to dialogue with you. We'll have boards and maps and materials, a copy of the EA, and so we can go deep with you in that conversation. So just wanted to remind you of that. So I want to get to my next question, which is from Sergio Castañeros, who asked, how is significant quantified in this GHG statement quantification? And so sounds like you're going to have to do a little bit of definition for us, because I don't know what GHG statement quantification means. So
Sure
someone
thing.
can help me with that.
Yeah, it was just clarification because it was mentioned that greenhouse gases, GHG, were insignificant through the development of this project. And I was wondering what is insignificant, or what's the threshold to determine if something's significant or not in the context of this project?
Thank you so much, Sergio, for your help with that. Is that Tim?
I can help a little bit with that,
Okay.
unless Dave, if you.
Why don't you start, Tim, and then I'll continue on if
Okay, so
you hit.
currently, and we do write this up in the report, and I think it might be in our appendix, there are no defined significance thresholds for aviation-related greenhouse gas emissions, nor has the FAA identified any factors to consider in making a significance determination for greenhouse gas emissions. So basically, because there are no significance thresholds established for climate impacts, the greenhouse gases associated with the proposed action have been calculated in accordance with the latest FAA guidelines, which is using 1050.1F, which is the FAA order that defines how to look at greenhouse gas emissions for climate impacts in a NEPA document, which this is. And we include the emissions spreadsheets in the appendix of our tech memo as well. So that's why it says it's not significant at this time, because there have not been defined greenhouse gas significance thresholds, whereas there are defined thresholds for pollutants associated with the Clean Air Act that Dave mentioned earlier.
Yeah, the only other thing, thanks, Tim, that was great.
Yep.
The only other thing, Sergio, that I would say is that what we report in here is the increase in greenhouse gas emissions is reported in the context of national and global greenhouse gas emissions. That's the only way we can do that, to be able to just give you some context for how much we're really talking about with respect to greenhouse gas emissions. And I would suggest, if you haven't looked at the EA, I would suggest you go to section 3.6. That's where all of this occurs. And then Tim has that the appendix, and we reference the appendix there as well.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I couldn't find it, but I'll take a closer look at that and follow up with this.
Yeah, if you start, Sergio, if you start on, if you're in section 3.6, that begins on page 3-23.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Appendix D, Appendix Delta is the noise and air quality appendix that has some additional information as well.
Okay, I appreciate it. I'll take a look.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, you bet.
And thank you to our presenters and panelists. I'll call you panelists for sake of a better term tonight, for being so well prepared and being able to give people the exact page number to get their question answered. That's pretty incredible. We've got a few more questions that I see, and so I just want to encourage you that those of you who joined us, if you have additional questions or comments, go ahead and place them in the chat or raise your hand. We're happy to get to you. And then I want to check in with my team as well, who's helping to monitor our Facebook participants and see if there are any comments or questions there. I looked a minute ago, I didn't see anything, but if someone could check on that for me, I would greatly appreciate it. So we've got a question from Catherine Bellman-Goggins and another one from Vanessa Jimenez. Catherine's question is about the facilities being easily adapted for sustainable aviation. And then Vanessa's question is about endangered animals, I believe, and the migration of endangered animals into the neighborhood. So we'll take Catherine's question first. Will these facilities be easily adapted for sustainable aviation fuel in the future? Who can help us with that answer?
I can take that. Hi, this is Kane, the environmental manager here at the airport. Sustainable aviation fuel is in play today at the Austin Airport. One of our FBOs, the fixed-based operators, which are the general aviation folks here at the airport, they are have that option today, and they are providing sustainable aviation fuel to customers if they request it. So sustainable aviation fuel is a drop-in fuel. So that means we can blend it right into the aircraft once it's approved through the ASTM standards. And so the facilities that are being constructed today and will be constructed in the future will be able to accommodate sustainable aviation fuel. And we're welcoming it and hope they can be ramped up into production, in the next decade.
Anyone else want to weigh in on sustainable? Okay, thank you, Kane, for that response. All right, this is one of our nearby neighbors, Vanessa Jimenez, who says, I do understand that land use will not disturb endangered animals as there are none, but there is so much movement in the animal population due to constant construction in the area as a whole. If the airport indirectly increases the pest population in our street due to animals migrating into our neighborhoods, how will Austin help us, I think, prevent in the future property damage if that occurs? Who can help us with that question, a response to Vanessa's question?
Well, normally I would be happy to talk about urban wildlife and the impacts that it has on people and their property. But I feel like this is really a question about what can the city do for this future issue. And I don't know that I'm really in a position to talk about that part.
Okay. There are a bunch of folks that are representing the City of Austin Aviation Department. And one of the things that we can do, Vanessa, is to forward that question or try to find out who can help answer that question if there is an answer available to you. So if you will allow us a couple of weeks to figure that out, that would be very helpful. All right. Thank you so much. My team checked Facebook and I got a note that there are no comments or questions on Facebook. So thank you for that. I don't see any additional comments or questions in my chat, and I just want to do a check and see if there are any hands raised anywhere, if I'm missing anything or anybody, because it looks like we are almost complete for this evening if there aren't any additional questions or comments that pop in. All right, well, while we're doing that, thank you to you, David. Thank you, Kristen. Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Brian and Kane. As well for helping us out this evening. We'll go ahead and go to our next slide, which I believe has details on the open house meeting that is going to be held this Saturday. Oh, Amanda got in just the last few seconds here. Amanda Carrillo, thank you so much for your question here that just popped in. So Her question is the EA separate from the tank farm? Great question. Is the EA, so is the environmental assessment that we're doing right now separate from the tank farm? Who can help us with that answer?
I'll take that one, Sharonda. Yeah, Amanda, great question. To answer your question, yes, it is separate. The tank farm had its own environmental assessment that was done. And I welcome you to reach out to the city. We can give you links to where that document is, so you can read up on the assessment that was done on it. But this particular environmental assessment does not include the tank farm.
Right, thank you so much.
There was an earlier question from Solana that we haven't answered yet about takeoffs and landings.
Right, and what we said, Tim, was that there is a meeting coming up on Monday,
Okay.
and that we'll handle it there. So thank you for that. Okay,
Okay.
all right.
Sharonda, hey, Sharonda, this is Kane. Did
Yes.
we get the question about the cargo facility? I just want to make
I
sure.
did not see that question, so thank you for that. Who asked that one?
Amanda.
Sharonda, it looks like Amanda Blackwelder.
Ah, okay, I see it. Thank you. This was a question at 6:34. All right. So thank you all. That's what team is about, right? Making sure that we capture everyone and help me out here. So Amanda, thank you for your question. Her question is, should we expect the cargo facility to undergo a similar expansion? Our neighborhood across from Highway 71 from the cargo facility is already affected by the sounds and fumes from cargo, especially early in the morning, starting at approximately 6 a.m. I understand from an ABIA rep that this is an Amazon flight. Okay, so we got Amazon called out in our meeting today. Okay, so under similar expansion for the cargo facility, who can help us with that answer?
I can take it. Hi, Amanda. Kane.
Kane, you've muted
Oh,
yourself.
sorry.
There you go. All right, thank
Great.
you.
Sorry about that. The cargo facility is being expanded today slightly. We are adding another warehouse on the south side. The ramp portion is not being modified. So, and that facility is getting pretty tight. So I don't, there may be some other warehouses added in the future, but it's going to be becoming pretty constrained in the very near future. But we're adding a warehouse right now. So I hope that answers your question, or send us another one if I can provide more detail. And if that's maybe you're in the neighborhood, Richland Estates, we'll be at the meeting on Monday at 6 p.m.
And Amanda has one more question. And I'm not quite sure I understand it. So Amanda, you might be able to help us understand it a little more. The question is why is it taking so long to get the EA to the public? Not exactly sure what that means. I do know that the EA was made available to everyone online in those 3 locations that I mentioned, the library, on the airport site. Oh, that's another Amanda. Oh, sorry. Okay. Keep me straight, y'all. Let's get it together. Thank you. So it was made available at the library, online, at Austin City Hall, and at the airport site on February 22nd. So Amanda Carrillo, I'm not quite sure if that answers your question or not. Okay, so Paul D Fiore is jumping in for Amanda. Let's see if she can answer for herself, though. I don't want to put words in someone else's mouth. But thank you for your comment, Paul. All right. Well, as we get that together, Amanda, if you have anything else to add, that would be helpful to us to understanding what the meaning is behind your question. We would greatly appreciate it. As we're getting that cleared up, if we can go ahead and, all right, so yes, Paul, it's correct. Referring to the lack of public engagement around the first EA and the tank farms. Okay, thank you for that comment. Thank you so much, Amanda. All right, so I want to pull up, I think it's slide 29, everyone, that has the details about the open house that is this Saturday. And then we will skip over to slide 32, which are next steps. All right. So as I've mentioned a couple of times, and I wanted to share it on the screen here, that we have an open house that we're super excited about. It'll be in person. You'll have an opportunity. It's a come and go as you please. And it's 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. on Saturday, March 26th. I do want to just point out that there is, I believe, a NASCAR race that's happening around the same time period. So please plan extra travel time to get to the meeting anytime between 10 a.m. and 1 p.m. We will have a brief overview presentation at 10:30 a.m. and also at noon on Saturday. And there'll be lots of boards. The present materials that you see in this presentation will be available, as well as a copy of the full EA, I believe. And Spanish interpretation will also be provided during that meeting. There is free parking on site, and the location is 2716 Spirit of Texas Drive, right next to the airport. The EA is also available online at speakupaustin.org/AUS-EA. And if you could skip over to slide 32 for me. All right, so I want to turn this back over to Brian, who I believe is going to go through our next steps for this process.
Yeah, thanks, Sharonda. So the next steps are that this meeting is being recorded, and so a recording of tonight's meeting will be uploaded to the project webpage. The Speak Up Austin website that we showcased earlier, and it's at the bottom of the slide there for your convenience also. That'll be uploaded in the next couple of days. As a reminder, the comment period will close at 5 p.m. on April 7th. And so we encourage you to send in those comments as early as possible to make sure that we capture them and can respond to them. All the comments that will be received through the formal methods that we previously talked about will be responded to, and those comments and responses will be included in the final EA document that we will submit to the FAA by the end of April. And so in addition to that, the comments and the responses will be posted on the Speak Up Austin project website after the FAA has issued their decision on the project.
Thank you so much, Brian, for giving us those next steps. All right, well, I think that brings us to the close of our meeting for this evening. We hope that you will tell your friends and neighbors about the opportunity to join us on Saturday. We look forward to seeing you there. And thank you for joining. This has been the draft environmental assessment for the Austin-Bergstrom International Airport Expansion and Development Program meeting. Have a good evening, everyone. Take care.